Welcome to this edition of Intermat's conference report. And today it's the first time we are hitting on the Pac-12, and we have our Pac-12 correspondent, Darius, otherwise known as the Wrestling Quoter. Thanks for joining us, Darius.
Thanks for having me, Earl.
All right, so let's jump into it. Just a couple days ago, maybe not even two, news came out of Cal Poly. Uh, Coaching change. Tristan Moran was added as a volunteer assistant. He has some familiarity now with Evan Wick coming in there, both from the Wisconsin program. So, what's going on with Tristan out there?
Yeah, and just like you said, Earl, he joins the staff as a volunteer assistant as the Cal Poly staff pressed out or released recently, and he joins John Cerritos and the recently promoted Chris Giannuma. Those two guys have been around for at least for Chris, Coach Giannuma there a couple of years or a few years now, and Coach John Cerritos, I believe he's going into his 5th year with that program. Tristan joins Sean Foz, who was there for I think a year or two now as well, and they really bolster that. He really bolsters that coaching staff on a team that is starting to round out in a big way with John Cerritos. For those of you that are in the know with the wrestling world, he was the head coach at Grand Canyon, which we are all expecting to join and make a big splash on the D1 scene. A handful of years now before shifting over to Cal Poly when unfortunately that program got dropped because they could not find themselves a conference. But Moran, he slots in, like, just as you mentioned, with the Evan Wick transfer, something we'll talk about in a little bit here. And they really merge in and integrate themselves with a team that's really starting to pick it up on a competitive level. This past year, I know it is a COVID season, but nonetheless, Cal Poly marked its a program first for at least Coach Cerritos during his tenure. They matched the 2012 team coming out of that the Boris Novichkov era at Cal Poly with a 25th place team finish at the NCAAs. So that was almost, I believe, 9 seasons before they reattained something like that. So in addition, that obviously that was powered by Pac-12 champion and All-American Bernie Truax. Last year's John Cerritos got an All-American selection out of Tom Lane at 197, but Bernie Truax was the first. I don't want to say real All-American, but he's the first one that competed.
Say place winner. I think that's
right,
what Jason Bryan says.
There we go. Yeah, we'll use the Masters, the Podfather of wrestling podcast. There, we'll use his lingo and his vernacular. But so when you bring in a guy like Evan Wick, who comes out of the Big Ten with all the metal that comes out of that conference in that season, especially Wisconsin, they're building as well. Obviously that room just gets a little bit deeper to be using oxymoron. I think it gets a lot better with Evan Wick, but also when you have Tristan Moran himself as a competitor, a 2-time NCAA qualifier, and in the non-COVID year 2019 he was around a 12 as well. So he was right there to be an All-American. Unfortunately, I think his senior year was 2020, and he didn't get his chance to right the wrong. I'm sure that's how he feels about it, to get an All-American. But you got to think now with Moran coming in, those middleweights and those upper weights, even with Chris Giannuma there, they're going to be well rounded out. And my California bias is going to come out a little bit, but in California, you're always going to have good lightweights, right? So
sure.
When you have your middleweights ironed out with now 2 immediate All-American contenders, you're in a good spot to start building on especially a top 25 team. And we're kind of shifting gears here, but another obvious team that has seen some big coaching staff changes is Stanford. Stanford has been the darling program of the D1 landscape, and to be sure, Mick make no bones about it, about the entire wrestling community, I'd say. Stanford was up and in your face about it this last season, and to a lot of credit to the team there, and Coach Borelli, who's now at American, as well as I believe it's Coach Alex Tirapelli, who just got announced there too. I know Coach Blake was a part of that staff, integral part of that team for a long time. He's coaching high school, I think, in Oklahoma now. But they made a name for themselves in a big way, and with the Borelli era ending on a high point with his first national champion during his tenure, I believe. Rob Cole comes in after a long tenure at Cornell to take on the Cardinal program, and he brought on Enoch Francois and Vincenzo Joseph onto his staff. One thing I had tweeted out a few weeks ago now, but it's weird the way the world works, especially in the wrestling community. Vincenzo Joseph was, he took a loss to, I believe is an All-American, or at least a national qualifier a couple of times, Keaton Subject from Stanford, a year that he ended up becoming a national champion when he was wrestling for Penn State there. So sure enough, he finds himself in Palo Alto. And the obvious connection that a lot of people saw when Joseph got called on the staff was his immediate importance to the likes of a Shane Griffith as a training partner. Vincenzo is not that old. I think only a year or two out of college now, so he's definitely still sharp. And I believe it has been confirmed that Shane Griffith will be staying on campus as well. So Rob Cole steps into a team that there's a lot of question marks coming out of this year, especially when you compare Stanford to a Fresno State, where a lot of those guys had to make hard decisions and step towards the transfer portal, step into the transfer portal rather, and find new homes. With the Cardinal program, they were coming off an incredible recruiting class, or a couple of great recruiting classes with nationally heralded recruits, such as Real Woods. Obviously, Jay Navis is a California kid, and the likes of Shane Griffith. So the loyal, one thing that I may not be able to speak on, but something that you can observe from the outside looking in, is how much loyalty those guys had to their team, and surely Coach Borelli. But when you have a new staff or a new coach, such as of the caliber of Rob Cole, I'm sure it speaks volumes to him, and that it's something that he's going to enjoy as a benefit and advantage to know the guys on the team are all in for each other. And now with hopefully a reemphasis in that athletic department in terms of maintaining the program going forward, we'll be seeing a long tenure for Rob Cole at the helm of the Cardinal program here at Stanford. So, but that's not the only change. The coaching carousel definitely has left its mark in the Pac-12 this year, but also in the recent couple of years as well. Oregon State, led by Coach Pendleton and Isaiah Martinez, as well as Nate Angle, all three guys that for the former two were California products, and Nate Angle has definitely spent his time in the Golden State as well. He was previously on the Stanford staff, most recently prior to moving over to Oregon State. They only have one season under their belt, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But even though they didn't put a wrestler on the podium this past season, they had 3 in the round of 16. So,
they're also going to round out their coaching staff. So we should see a new hire from them as well at the volunteer assistant.
Right. And, when they fill that opening, I'm sure it's going to be just another addition to a solid coaching staff. And that's something that's becoming thematic across the Pac-12. If you consider a team that we haven't discussed quite yet, but Zeke Jones's Sun Devils at Arizona State. I remember, gosh, it has been 6-7 years ago now when Zeke made the transition out of Team USA as the head coach of the men's freestyle program back to his alma mater. It was weird to think of Zeke as the new coach, in the conference, and now he quickly has become, I think the longest tenured coach there.
Yeah.
So, but in any case, I think, and I can't confirm this, but I believe if the information is still up to date, I think Doyle Trout, I don't think he's on as the volunteer assistant, but Doyle Trout, if that's who I'm thinking of, he wrestled for Oregon State for a few years there. He got brought on as the graduate student assistant. So they're going to have him back in the room, being a leader for those guys as, we'll talk about performance in a little bit here as I keep pushing off, but Pendleton coming in with a new team, under Zaleski, they had a very good program. And a lot of those guys stuck around. Devin Turner was I believe a Pac-12 champion for Zaleski, and then he repeated this year as a Pac-12 champion. So continuing to build on the foundation of the team that was there, and making sure that you do right by the guys that were in the program prior to you. I think that's important for any coaching staff, and it's clear that that's what's been going on with Oregon State as well. And just to touch on it, of course, Lightning Luke Smith, belated congratulations to him. He was the interim head coach at Cal State Bakersfield, or AKA CSU Bakersfield, depending on who you're asking. He was the interim this past season, and then they made it official at the end of this season. So he's not I don't believe he was born in California, but
no, he's a Wisconsin guy.
There we go. Yeah, I know. Fire Up Chips, big shout out to our friend Kevin Claunch there. But I'm more than happy to bring in. I've watched actually some of your videos, Earl, from the D1CW days of the video vault of Coach Smith, and he definitely has the flair of a California guy. He was a lightweight in his time, but a lot of scrambling, a lot of neutral offense. So he definitely fits right in here in California.
Sure.
And then last but not least, of course, Neil Arisman at Arkansas Little Rock. They're only in their third overall season all time. So lots of new faces in the Pac-12 and in the conference, but not the lack of talent for it.
And those guys, like this is their third year, but it's going to be maybe their first full year, because you had the COVID cancellation of the NCAA tournament. They didn't have anybody that qualified that year, but they had that. Then they had kind of the messed up 2021 season. So let's give them a full year and see what happens, especially with some good recruiting classes.
Oh yeah, Earl, you're right. And, it's one of those things where, for everybody, it's COVID impacted everybody in every dimension at every level, college athletics or not, and it definitely left its mark on the Division I landscape. And it's crazy to look back at some of these records for guys in the past season, and then I believe speaking of Bakersfield, some of their guys have only had 3 matches coming out of I think even coming out of Pac-12s or going into Pac-12s at the at minimum there. So it will be interesting to see Arkansas Little Rock, and the silver lining for them, perhaps. Everyone had negative things to come out of that resulted of COVID, I think, in their life and in their network. But for the program at Arkansas, it gave them a little bit more time, right? It gives them a little bit more time. Obviously, they competed. Obviously, you wrestle the matches that are in front of you. But when you can afford to give guys maybe a little bit more time off, a little bit more time in the room to develop and not be under the gun of the D1 full season from really early November through March. You bolster your development, or you'd hope that that's what they're putting their time into. Of course, when you consider a team like Stanford, where they weren't even allowed to practice on campus all season and they had to make do in a big way, there's a chance that you didn't get the silver lining. But I think over at Arkansas, I'm sure they're making it happen. With Arisman and of course Pat Smith integral there over making sure that program runs smoothly.
So we're going to change gears a little bit and kind of talk about the conference as a whole. There was an announcement a few weeks ago now from the Pac-12 itself. They're kind of confirming, doubling down on their investment in the sport. They've mentioned about, I guess, being open to having an affiliate members, which they haven't been in recent history. So, I know you're going to get into this probably a little more at a later date on Intermat, but just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. It's something that it was probably a surprise to many people in the wrestling community to see something so so direct from the conference. As we sort of alluded with when we were discussing Coach Cerritos at Cal Poly. I believe back then, one of the big hurdle for Grand Canyon U was their expectation to get added on as an affiliate member in the Pac-12. And back then the answer was no, and they couldn't find a home. And the school, I believe Grand Canyon University, is a for-profit private. And because of that, the school decided, hey, if we can't find a sponsor, then we won't have the team. And that's when it dropped, and to see now, especially in light of the very grassroots effort to save and reinstate Stanford in especially the wrestling team, of course, but there are also 10 other teams in that effort. But speaking in terms of wrestling, it is very good to see the Pac-12 front office come out with something so definitive and say, we are affirming that we're invested in the sport. We are changing the way we're thinking about membership in the Pac-12 with regards to wrestling. And, for wrestling fans, the obvious hope here is that we're going to see what I would consider common sense teams added going into the future, right? Yeah. Not to say that I don't like Arkansas Little Rock, but obviously they're probably closer to the Gulf of Mexico than the Pacific Ocean. But I'll keep them in the Pac-12 as long as they'll want to be, and as long as we can have them, because we can always use a little bit of Southern flair here on the West Coast. But teams like Fresno State, when they got reinstated, and fingers crossed here, hashtag save Fresno State wrestling. Hopefully they stay around even longer. But when they got reinstated a handful of years ago now, and even with Cal Baptist, who's making their transition into D1 over the next, the next couple more years, it seems like they had the longest timeline for transitioning from D2 to D1 here. But teams like that, I know Fresno State was competing in the Big 12, and I went ahead and verified. I believe Cal Baptist is aiming to join the Big 12 as well.
Yeah, that's great.
A conference that is huge already. In terms of logistics, just moving teams around geographically, as well as how many programs are already in the Big 12. Those teams would make more sense to me in the Pac-12, right? And then you add, of course, you add those teams, you add a little bit more depth, and you give the Pac-12 competitors a chance to automatically qualify out of the conference versus where it's now, maybe 125 and 133, another weight class that has some depth, will have 2 or 3 auto qualifiers coming out of conferences, with only the conference champs in other weight classes being the for sure qualifiers. When you can start to add the number of teams, but also the depth of competition and the quality of competition, you can start to secure some more of those auto bids that are pretty well valuated right now. I know the ACC has brought up their stake in those numbers, so Pac-12, hopefully this is a good sign that they'll start to make the moves to get to that place as well with auto qualifiers.
Yeah, I know that's going to be something that both of us are monitoring going forward. So as we kind of wrap up, I know you wanted to hit on each of the individual teams and just a little something to watch or something that's happened in the off season. So what do you got? Start with Arizona State.
Sure. So leading off with the defending conference champs, they come out of 2021 with a team trophy. They placed 4th in the nation last year as a team. Obviously for Coach Jones, he's looking to build on that and get back to, I believe it's the 1988 team that he was a part of, in fact, the national championship team at Arizona State. So once, one one more box to check off for him and his staff. But in the off season here, they've been keeping busy, right in line with the ethos of that team, and keeping in the Olympic spirit here. Zahid Valencia and Colton Schultz, competing for the Sunkist Kids, I believe, but for sure they're Sun Devils that made the national team for the freestyle and Greco national teams there, respectively. So they're competing through the summer, and that's on the international side. On the folk style side and the collegiate side of things, they're coming in to the 2022 season with a very highly anticipated team. They have the number 2 recruiting class as ranked by us at Intermat. For me, notable guys coming out of California there. I know they have I believe it's a Pennsylvania state champ on that recruiting class. Maybe I'm thinking of another state here, but
they have Carter Diebert.
There we go. So,
yeah.
And he joins in with a couple of California guys that I've been keeping an eye on for a long time here, as well as obviously the youngest, or maybe the younger brother. I'm not sure if he's the youngest brother, but he's the younger brother, Kyle Valencia, brother to Anthony and Zahid, couple times state champ, I believe, as well as the very well known Richard Figueroa, who's at different times in his high school career was number 1 in the nation as the pound for pound high school wrestler. So they add in a couple of transfers, notably Kyle Parco, Fresno State All-American last year, he's from the NCS. He wrestled at De La Salle, the North Coast section here in California, so in the Bay Area, local to me. And he definitely put the team on his back there this past season, earning All-American for Fresno State in a year where they were, and they're continuing to fight for their program. So he being Cal Parco, he adds to the recruiting class, but also a team that is still very strong. Obviously, they sent 8 to NCAAs with 5 on the podium, 5 All-Americans there. And obviously, as I mentioned, the aforementioned 4th place team trophy. So I don't see Arizona State slowing down anytime soon. And as we move forward into the remainder of the teams here, Arkansas Little Rock, we'll go alphabetical, if you don't mind, Earl.
Sure.
For Arkansas Little Rock, as we had noted, they're in their 3rd and potentially their first real year, their first real season. Fingers crossed everything continues to trend upward for all of us, and that normalcy will get closer and closer as we get to wrestling time here in the late fall. But they're building on a really good foundation over there for the Trojans at Little Rock, because they had Paul Bianchi make the team's first NCAA appearance. He got an at-large bid coming out of Pac-12s, and he went 1-2 at 133. So he not only did the Trojans have their first qualifier, they got their first NCAA match win to go along with their first Division I dual meet victory during the season. So on the competitive standpoint, they're moving forward for sure. Of course, there's work to be done. It's not, Rome wasn't built in a day. But Coach Arisman over there has got things rolling in the right direction. And not just in the athletics, but something that has been clear from the beginning at that campus was the academics. And in the spring here, wrestling was a part of. I think it was spring honor roll, but it was the winter teams. I think wrestlers were a part of a group of 37 student athletes at Little Rock that posted a 3.0 or higher, and a couple of their guys posted 4.0s as well. And in fact, their NCAA qualifier, Paul Bianchi, I believe he was named to the NWCA Scholar All-Americans team. I'm not sure first or second team, but as we've known in the past decade plus, APR has become a huge part of being a Division I head coach. And APR, for those that don't know, I believe it's is it academic progress rating. And in essence, you got to have a good team GPA, and if you don't, you're going to get sanctions from your campus. So athletics, scholar athlete, the student comes first. And it's good to see Coach Arisman's doing things the right way, of course, building a strong academic foundation as well as the athletic performance on the mat.
Yep, and let's go to, how about Bakersfield? We mentioned that Luke Smith is officially the head coach after having the interim tag last year, and they do have some good young, I'd say horses in the stable, but they're road runners. So I don't know what you call a group of road runners.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'll be sure to ask Coach Smith there. He's got, I think the hashtag they've been using lately is beep beep, very, very much an homage to Roadrunner of Looney Tunes fame. But
Yep.
But nonetheless, yeah, they definitely do have some horses in the stable, to use that idiom. Bakersfield, my conception of that team has always been a very much a homegrown team, California heavy in terms of their lineup. And that's not to say that they haven't gotten more out-of-state recruits in the last few years, but definitely still a very California heavy lineup. One thing that I can only imagine that Coach Smith was brought on full time, or the full-fledged head coach, in part because of the athletic performance, but also I'm sure the administrative and managerial chops that he brings to the table, and that they proved in the last year. Obviously, the COVID season is a rough dress rehearsal for anybody in any job. So I can't imagine it was particularly easy for Coach Smith in light of duels being canceled and things of that nature. But in terms of maintaining the legacy at Cal State Bakersfield, he definitely did his job in that regard. They got he adopted a team, or he inherited a team that had brought a competitor to NCAAs for 47 straight years going into 2021. And they added another year to that for sure with Dom Ducharme. He was a Windsor High School grad in the NCS here as well in California. And he earned a Pac-12 championship as well as the auto bid to qualify at NCAAs. And so he extended the streak, and alongside a couple of his teammates got at-large bids as well. Chance Rich and Angelo Martinoni, couple NCAA qualifiers this past season. Rich has been, or he was in the round of 12 this past year, a win away from All-American, which would have been the first Bakersfield All-American since 2014 with Bryce Hammond way back when. So, that's obviously something that team and Coach Smith is hunting for, which would be their next All-American. I'm sure Chance Rich will be right back in that conversation in that All-American hunt next year. He was doing some Greco this past offseason in the spring here, even notching a pretty notable win against eventual world teamer Randon Miranda at I guess we were calling it the U.S. Open at the time, or maybe it was U.S. Nationals or much earlier in this year. So, and Angelo Martinoni, standout in the SJS Sac Joaquin section here, a little bit more closer to me, in fact. He's brought on the California style that is transcendent. So I would say, this is a bit of an aside, but some guys in California, their style doesn't translate particularly well to collegiate, a little bit too flashy, a little bit too neutral reliant. And for Martinoni, I think he had his growing pains, but he's definitely built himself into a legit contender, and look to see those two guys, Chance Rich and Angelo Martinoni, sort of lead this team going forward into the next year.
Right, and going down the list, a team that I've followed based on their head coach. He's from Virginia, John Cerritos. You mentioned his history a little bit and a little bit about the team already, but what else can you tell us about Cal Poly?
Yeah, we definitely touched on it a bunch at the start of our discussion here, Earl. And just to reemphasize, Cerritos was building a good thing at Grand Canyon, and then he had to sort of restart and at Cal Poly, a team that has definitely seen its share of high accomplishment at the Division I level. 10 years ago, we were talking about the Mendez, Chad Mendez, Chase Pammy, Boris Novachkov, Philip Novachkov era of things, Ryan DeRoches, those guys always wrestling in the All-American rounds, always getting guys to the national tournament. And there was a bit of a dip there for a few years, as Cerritos came in, and also as he started to bring. I think the phrase that we may have used several years ago was culture change at Cal Poly. Not to say that things were all bad there, but when the new, he came in and he definitely implemented his philosophy, and now they're starting to see it with this past year. Of course, like I mentioned, the top 25 team finish at NCAAs, and I believe and almost surely they outplaced some of the teams that beat them at conferences. So performing when the lights are on, and it all counts at NCAAs. But things guys on the Cal Poly team have definitely maintained the brand, even going back a few years now. Guys like Colton Schilling, excuse me, Pac-12 champ, NCAA qualifier. Tom Lane, as aforementioned, he was All-American selection last year during the COVID year. But having a guy like Bernie Truax, who was a qualifier in 2020 and an All-American, as mentioned, in 2021, sort of one of those Cerritos guys. It was definitely, I'm not sure the recruiting situation, but I'm sure he came in under Cerritos. I think he's only a junior now. So seeing the results and the performances of your own guys, I know that's a very important thing for quote unquote new coaches. And even though he comes into his 5th year here, and of course you bring in a guy like Evan Wick, who was a California state champ himself. And a lot of the time when those top tier talents make it out, or finish their prep careers, and when you see him go on to the Big 12 or the Big 10, some of those power conferences, you're happy for him, but you're sort of sad because they're not wrestling for a California team. So to know that Evan Wick comes back with All-American honors to his name, and Big 10 seasons under his pedigree, and is now strapping on Cal Poly alongside his brother Luca Wick, who's the incoming freshman here. There's a lot to be excited for with Cal Poly going forward, and you hope to see them start to again have guys compete for national titles as they did 10 years ago.
Yep, for sure. And then we're talking Oregon State. You already hit on the great staff that Coach Pendleton has assembled and going into their 2nd year. I know something I've monitored the past couple weeks, months, is some of these transfers they brought in. They're really going to just kind of fit in there and solidify what was already a pretty strong lineup.
Yeah, you definitely you said it, Earl. When you look at Oregon State, you have a young coaching staff, but they are immediately competitive as expected. 2nd place behind Arizona State at Pac-12s there. Aforementioned, but although they missed the All-American podium with their wrestlers, they sent 6 to NCAAs, a solid group, 3 in the round of 16, as aforementioned. So guys winning matches at the NCAAs and putting themselves in position to start to compete with the best. And, most recently, as you noted, Earl, 2 pretty prominent transfers coming in to make Oregon State even more immediately competitive. With the addition of Tanner Harvey, he comes over from American U. He was a JUCO national champ way back when, and in a way he's coming back home. I believe he was a JUCO national champ for Southwestern Oregon, and he was a 2-time NCAA qualifier during his time at American. So um, he's got the goods. He's ready to compete at the D1 level. And all things considered, Chris Pendleton, he was right around. I think he was 174, 184 in college, if I'm not mistaken.
174.
So with a guy like Tanner Harvey, I believe he's an 84 himself. It's a pretty good match, with the head coach. But I'm sure Imar gives those guys all they want in terms of the smoke, even though he's a 163 right now. But additionally, we have Corey Crooks transferring in, and in fact, an in-conference transfer, one of those rare situations. I think I don't have this confirmed, but I speculate that this was sort of one of those undergrad to graduate school type moves for Mr. Crooks. But Corey Crooks comes from ASU, Arizona State, and he was part of the 4th place national tournament team at Arizona State. He was a 2021 national qualifier. So he, as of course, just like Tanner Harvey, he's got the goods as well. When you bring in 2 NCAA qualifiers, your team, and if not your lineup, definitely your room gets that much better immediately. So expect Oregon State to vie for Chris Pendleton's first All-American at Oregon State, but also try to wrest away the firm grasp of the conference from Arizona State as well.
And they also got Gary Traub, Gas Team Gary at heavyweight, and another guy I'm interested to see how he fits in, Isaiah Crosby, another JUCO champ that looks like 57-65, which doesn't appear to be a huge need for those guys, but looks like another good body in the room. So our final team, we talked quite a bit at the beginning about the new coaching staff at Stanford: Rob Cole, Enoch Francois, Vincenzo Joseph. It's going to be fun to see how these guys make their mark on the program.
Absolutely. And for Coach Cole, he brings along some rather fresh faces. I know Francois, I believe he's been in the coaching arena a little bit himself, but I know him most from his national team time. He's been competitive in the senior circuit for Team USA, and domestically, and I'm sure on a couple of international tours as well. And a sidebar, even in the jiu-jitsu arena, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, he's got some IBJJF tournaments under his belt as well. And of course, we aforementioned Vincenzo Joseph, couple-time national champ, and he is a 4-time finalist, right? Am I mistaken?
No, because he was part of that 2020.
That's right.
COVID year where, he looked like he was going to be on that trail,
For sure. Yeah.
Probably pencil him in, but
yeah, he would definitely turn it on for sure. That long weekend in March in any case. Right. So, well, that being said, 3-time place winner, and obviously 3 times in the finals when they competed that tournament. I'm sure, I didn't look this one up, but I'm sure he got an All-American nod from the NWCA his senior year as well. So, a couple of young guys to join Rob Cole, but Coach Cole has always, at least from what I've gathered from him in interviews that he's done with other people. I haven't had the privilege yet of interviewing Coach Cole, but he's an open mind, obviously a very intellectual and cerebral coach, but always seems open to new perspectives. And when you bring in those 2 guys under him, I have no doubt that he's going to make an immediate impact when in his first season out, his first at bat, and that being Coach Cole. And as I mentioned earlier, he adopts, and I guess adopts would be the right word. He adopts a team that, they sent 7 to NCAAs, 1 in the blood round with Real Woods and a nationally ranked prep for sure. And then 2 big AAs and Jayden Abbas, 7th place finisher. I believe it was at 41 or 49.
Yeah, 49.
And obviously the Abbas, if you've been around wrestling even a little bit in California or from way back in the 90s, you definitely recognize that last name. His family, I believe his dad is Jerry, and his a 4-time All-American for Fresno State, and I think the first 3-time national finalist in California history at the D1 level, I believe, is Jerry Abbas, and his uncle, 3-time national champ for Fresno State and Olympic silver, Stephen Abbas. So that was big just from a legacy standpoint to get Abbas on the podium, not to mention to save the program. And then, of course, the darling of the NCAA tournament in 2021, Shane Griffith, being a national champion. He's returning as well, as we had mentioned earlier. That I think the question still remains. The story for Stanford in the last month or so has been the rounding out of the coaching staff. But the question remains, I think, for the community, is to see who stays and who goes from Stanford. I know a lot of those guys that were on the team and competed this year. They worked very diligently in the off season and during the season so that they could wrap up their undergraduate degrees and put themselves in position to give themselves options. Very, very in line with any other wrestler or wrestling mindset. Do the work and put yourself in position to be successful. And that's what a lot of those guys did. Of course, a Stanford degree speaks volumes beyond the wrestling community. So it made sense for a lot of those guys to do that and give themselves the option to be in the transfer portal. But with a guy like Shane Griffith sticking around, you would hope that the core of that team will maintain and that Rob Cole will step off in his first season, very well equipped to make some noise in the conference. And if you look back at the Borelli era, Coach Cole had a very long tenure, and so did Coach Jason Borelli, who's now an American at Stanford. It was difficult to find that first conference title, despite the fact that they've had pretty strong teams at Stanford under Coach Borelli. I'm very happy that before he left the Stanford program, that him and his team earned a conference title back in 2019, I believe. Despite the strong efforts of Coach Jones's Sun Devils. But you can definitely win at Stanford. And when you think back, going back 10 and even now getting closer to 20 years with guys like Matt Gentry. And for me, sort of more contemporary in my time were guys like Nick Amuchastegui, Ryan Mango in the early 2010s. You definitely can put guys on the podium. Nick Amuchastegui was an elite 88, 89 winner twice. So, academics is an expectation at Stanford, but it also was an expectation, at Cornell, something that Rob Cole is not unfamiliar with. So I expect it's going to be a very good transition for Coach Cole. We'll have to see how it shakes out with the recruits that Coach Borelli had brought in or had signed prior to, I'm not sure what we want to call it, but the difficult period when Stanford decided, they were going to drop 11 programs. So I'm not sure exactly where some of those recruits shook out with regards to their commitment to the program. But that being said, I'm almost sure prior to his departure for American as well, Coach Tirapelli was still tweeting out, we just landed another hammer that's dedicated to Cardinal wrestling. So I have a feeling he's going to have a lot of talent to work with in Palo Alto.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Just the way he built the Cornell program and what he has to work with in the room already and his track record. So yeah, we're definitely going to keep our eye on that situation as well. That's going to wrap it up for today. Make sure to check Darius out on Intermat. His first work will be, in the coming weeks, and we'll produce some more videos like this. Until then, where can people find you on Twitter, on social media?
Yeah, for sure, Earl. You can find me at at Wrestling Quoter, aka the Quoter, on Twitter. Very identifiable, hopefully, icon or Avi there on my Twitter. It hasn't changed in a long time. It's the USA Wrestling logo superimposed underneath the iconic picture of Reese Humphrey bombing. I believe it was Ismail Poor during the World Cup back in gosh, was that 2014? Something like that. But yeah, you can see a lot of retweets from me. Sometimes some quotes. I don't get as much time to do quotes as I used to way back when I didn't have a job. So forgive me if I inundate your timeline with wrestling related retweets, but that's where you can find me. And sooner rather than later, you'll be able to see some of my work on Intermat.
Excellent. Well, we are looking forward to it. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Earl.